This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. David Njoku, we know he's going to be dope. He's a huge part of the Browns passing game. Amari Cooper, we know what Amari Cooper is about. He's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And Jerry Jeudy, we've had tons of conversations about what it is that Jerry Jeudy could potentially add to the Cleveland Browns plans in 2024. But there are some other names that I think have fallen off the radar that need to be discussed because these names are going to contribute significantly to the Cleveland Browns passing game. And who are these guys? The names are Jerome Ford, David Bell, and Elijah Moore. It feels like we've soured on these players in some aspect, right? Jerome Ford, he leads the league in most 0-yard gains. So how could he be effective? I've heard people suggest that we should cut Jerome Ford. David Bell fell so far off the radar that I did a video this summer where I was talking about Browns who really need a good camp to stay on the roster and keep their spot. I didn't put David Bell on there because I thought David Bell was going to be pretty safe in his spot and he wasn't going to be up for grabs in camp. And that omission led the top comment of that video to be, damn, Quincy must think David Bell going to get cut. He ain't even getting a chance to get. That's how low people are. People are assuming that David Bell is fighting for his life. I don't think that's the case. And Elijah Moore has fallen so far off the radar for a lot of fans that, like, I ain't even heard people be mad about Elijah Moore. Like, it's just like we don't even like acknowledge his existence anymore. Like every practice, we don't even see clips of Elijah Moore. He done fallen off the radar so hard. But not every time somebody falls off the radar is it justified. And I don't think it's justified for these three players. I think these three players all had strong ends to their 2023s, which we'll examine. I think that these three players are going to be a big part of what the Cleveland Browns want to do on the offensive side of the ball in 2024. Let's talk about Jerome Ford, who I think is probably the least justified falling off the radar candidate, because a lot of the hatred for Jerome Ford is the fact that he's not the best every down running back. As a matter of fact, he's not a great every down running back, right? He's going to be somebody who, if you run him a ton, he's going to get a lot of 0 or negative yard runs. But that's not all of the Jerome Ford story. From week 13 to the end of the year, Jerome Ford is your second best yak guy on the team. Njoku, who we all watched and witnessed during that period of time, was going on a tear. He had 8 forced missed tackles at the reception, which we can all acknowledge from week 13 to the end of the year. That's like 7 games. It's a pretty big number. Did you know Jerome Ford had 6 forced missed tackles at the reception, only behind David Njoku on the team? Jerome Ford was also second in touchdowns in that same time span. See, a lot, and I mean a lot, some of it rightfully so, is made of the stat that Jerome Ford had the most 0 or negative yard runs in the NFL last year. But that, to me, is only part of Jerome Ford's story. Jerome Ford was also somebody who played behind a pretty bad run blocking offensive line last year. The Browns ranked 21st in the NFL overall with the Pro Football Focus grade of 56.2 and tape that holds up that grade afterwards. And if you're wondering what it was like after DeJuan Jones and Jed Wills got injured last year, the run grade dropped from 56 to 54, which would drop them all the way to like 27th, 26 in the NFL. So he was playing behind a bad offensive line. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that he was so high in those 0 or no yard carries, because everybody who ran the ball for the Cleveland Browns during that period were high in 0 or no yard carries. That doesn't mean Jerome Ford doesn't do anything that helps exacerbate that, but it doesn't mean that that's all Jerome Ford is, because even though he did have a awful run blocking offensive line last year, partly due to injuries, Jerome Ford was also one of the best big play running backs in the NFL last year. And I think if Jerome Ford had just a better offensive line last year, the narrative around him would be much more similar to Raheem Mostert and not what it is currently. Because I think the Browns' offensive line is what really held Jerome Ford back more than anything. I know people pick on his vision and sometimes he's not quick enough to cut downhill, but this is somebody who had 23 10-plus yard runs last year. That's 13th most in the NFL. That's more than Derrick Henry had last year. And you don't get that many 10-plus yard runs if you have straight up, flat out, terrible vision, right? I see people compare him to Trent Richardson. Trent Richardson had like 2 10-plus yards in his entire career. Jerome Ford in this one season has 23 of them. His vision is not as bad as some people make it out to be. He also had 43 forced missed tackles last year, which is more than names that we respect like Jahmyr Gibbs and Isaiah Pacheco. Jerome Ford has been disrespected this year by his own fan base, and I think it's misguided. I think a lot of the things that are bad about Jerome Ford were just bad about the Browns' ability to run block all season. I said that the Jets game, when I was doing my rewatch, was the template for Jerome Ford. Like, if you want to know what Jerome Ford is capable of, go watch that Jets game. And in that Jets game, Jerome Ford got the best run blocking that he get all season, right? It was like a 75 Pro Football Focus grade. It was the best run blocking performance that the Browns would give Jerome Ford in a full-time role all season. And he did exactly what you wanted him to do. 12 carries, 55-plus yards, and then another 55-plus yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. This is who Jerome Ford could be. He's not an every down back. That's not his role. But what he can be is a great change of pace back. Think of him like Duke Johnson, but faster. Think of him like Raheem Mostert. Think of him like somebody that Miami would use very well, or Kyle Shanahan would use very well. I promise you, if the Browns give up on Jerome Ford and let him go, one of those 2 teams are going to get him, and you're going to regret giving up on Jerome Ford, because when I look at the stuff that he put out last year, there is a good football player in there. It's a question of if you're going to put him in the situations he needs to be put in to be successful. And see, that's not even all that Jerome Ford has to offer. We all know that he has skills as a receiving back. That is very clear. He's one of the best receiving backs. He's probably the best receiving back that the Cleveland Browns have on the roster right now. We all know he could be a big play threat from the running back position. But the other area where Jerome Ford is really good at is pass protection. He's the best pass protecting back that the Browns have on this roster, including Nick Chubb, and that shouldn't be forgotten either. But you know what else gets forgotten? David Bell. David Bell is so forgotten about by Browns fans, and the people who don't forget David Bell only remember him to add him to cut lists. I don't think that's the case. David Bell, in my opinion, was pretty solid at the end of last year. I think he did a good job of filling that role that Donovan Peoples-Jones had on that team. And I think he did a good job of just being a reliable, steady hand, especially from week 13 on. He was a short-handed guy, had a reception percentage of 85.7, only bested by Jerome Ford. So one of the most short-handed guys to throw the football to, definitely the most short-handed wide receiver to throw the football to towards the end of the season. He even had the highest contested catch percentage on the team, went 3 of 4 on contested catches, which again, pretty impressive because a lot of those contested catches were on 4th down situations. Speaking of first down situations, he wasn't flashy, but he got the job. From week 13 on, about 38% of all of David Bell's targets turned into first downs. That is only bested by Amari Cooper, who was sitting at an insane 45.6 during that time period. David Bell has a place on this roster. David Bell is going to be somebody who's going to accumulate some first downs for the Cleveland Browns. Look, what David Bell is good at and what he's going to be asked to do is not sexy. He's a short-handed wide receiver who can run good enough routes and get enough separations to be able to kind of hold the offense together. I think he could be a Willie Snead type receiver. I think a lot of people are forgetting about him, and I think that there's a chance that we remember him a lot better by the end of this season. The last guy I want to talk about is Elijah Moore. Now, Elijah Moore, I thought he had a really strong end of the year compared to the beginning of this year. He was on pace to hit more of his goals at the end of the year than he was at the beginning of the year. I think Elijah Moore will benefit from having two things: better offensive line play and better and more consistent quarterback play. I think those two things really hurt him. Elijah Moore is going to be the guy that the Browns lean on to do double moves, right? If they want to hit a double move, it's probably going to be him. The reason this is going to be the case is because they're going to be more on alert about a double move from Amari Cooper, or more on alert about a double move from Jerry Jeudy or David Njoku, because they're paying attention to those guys at a higher rate than they would be Elijah Moore. With Elijah Moore, there's a higher chance that you catch somebody slacking, catch somebody putting too much attention one way, and then you could take advantage of them with a double move from Elijah Moore. But for that to happen, the Browns have to protect long enough. That's the thing about double moves. They take a while to develop, so they got to protect long enough. And you have to have a quarterback who's patient enough to pull the trigger on that double move. And that's the hope with Deshaun Watson. So you need Deshaun Watson to stay healthy. You need the offensive line to stay healthy. If those two things happen, I do think Elijah Moore can have a pretty good year this year. Also, I think Elijah Moore is going to benefit from there being more wide receiver option plays in there. So plays where a wide receiver can choose based on what they're seeing, how they want to attack a play. He's always been a surgical route runner and more of a cerebral type of player. I think that's going to benefit him. It's obviously going to benefit like guys like Amari Cooper and so on and so forth. But I think if him and Deshaun can get that chemistry going, there's a combination there that makes a lot of sense. And I think that he's going to also benefit from Deshaun being able to make plays outside the structure of the pocket, which is something that Elijah Moore did well when Deshaun Watson was in there last year. I think Elijah Moore can surprise a lot of people, end up with about 600 to 700 receiving yards, and having himself a pretty damn nice season. But that's my thoughts. Those are my underrated guys. Who are your underrated guys from 2023 that people have taken off their radar that you think that should be back on the radar? Let me know in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.